Hello folks, welcome to the channel Jose. Today we're going to give you an idea how to replace the rear struts or shocks on the 91 to 94 Toyota Tercel, and this also applies for the 92 to 94 Toyota Paseo and the 95 to 99 Toyota Tercel and 95 to 99 Toyota Paseo. They're all similar, and on this Toyota Tercel the shocks are the same side, doesn't have sides, so one shock fits both sides. So we have two rear shocks, which is the same part for either side. And with that said, we already have the car in jack stand, so we can show you what's going to be the procedures down here and what's going to be the procedure up inside the cab, because that's how we access the strut towers, so we can take them off. And with that said, let's get started. So here's where our rear wheel driver's side will be, and right in here there's a bolt that goes side to side and it crosses. So this is the bolt, and then above is the strut tower inside. So we have to have access through the cab and through the back seat, remove the back seat, and then take a couple nuts off so we can drop the strut and we can bring it out, and then we can replace the shock and put the spring into the new strut. So now to access our strut tower or strut mount on the strut, we have to remove the bottom seat piece off first, and then we can expose two bolts that can remove this back piece from the car. So for that, we just gotta pull up and then away and get the seat belts through the holes so we can get this completely out of here, so we can start undoing the bottom and then remove this one by undoing two bolts and then pull them up and then extract it. So that's how you access those two strut towers. So let's get rid of these two pieces. Now that we have removed our bottom piece, this is where your fuel pump will be, and this is the access to it on the Tercel and in the Paseos. But the point is today is that we have to remove this 12mm bolt and that 12mm bolt over there, so we can get this seat to slide, or this back piece to slide up and then unhook itself from one point here and another point there, so we can access the strut tower, or where the strut is bolted down to the frame. So once we undo those two 12mm bolts, we can slide it up and then away, and that's how we access our strut towers tie down points. So now that we have flipped the seat so we can see where the tie down points are in the upper piece, that hook goes on this side and this one goes on that side because it's backwards right now. But that's how those hooks slide down and then keep the seat from coming back and forth, and the bolt keeps it from sliding up, so everything plays so this seat doesn't come off. So that's how you take it off. You gotta undo the bolts in the bottom, the two 12mm, and then slide it up so those hooks come out of there, so you can get it out, so you can start accessing the struts. So now let's show you where the access to the struts are once we remove this piece. So now we don't have the back piece or the bottom piece at all from the seat. So now that's your passenger side strut tower on the from the inside of the cab, and then there's the other one from the driver's side, and this nut and this nut are the ones that keep the strut into the frame, and the middle one is the one that keeps the structure of the strut together. Same scenario for this, as you can see. So now all we have to do is we take the outer nuts off so we can start dropping the strut, and then we go from the bottom to take it out. So let's do that now. So the two smaller nuts are 12mm, and I would do is I will put some WD-40 into the threads so it will come off easier, even on the middle one. So we'll do that to both sides, so it makes our job easier. What we have done is we have taken off completely both 12mm nuts. So all we have left is that we have to go through the bottom and take off the bolt from the lower suspension off so we can completely remove the strut from the driver's side out. So I just remove everything from above that is secures it to the structure, and then we go from below and take out the bolt. So now what we have to do is the strut is completely loose from the upper piece, so now we have to remove this bolt, which is a 40 millimeter. So we take it off so we can start removing the strut from the lower piece and bring it out. So now what we have is, here's this full structure of the rear strut. So what we have to do is now we have to take this nut off so we can start separating the strut or the spring from the shock. And to do that, we have to hold this flat bar or the inner piece with the adjustable wrench, and then undo this nut so we can take some threads off. But you gotta be careful, you don't want to do that when this is not compressed. So we're just gonna we're gonna take off some threads off, and once that nut reaches that level of that last thread, when they're flush, we're gonna go and compress the spring and continue. But right now we are just gonna loosen it by hand here outside, and then once we got it going, well, we're gonna compress the spring, but then because there might be tension, and if you completely take that nut off, it's gonna shoot out like a projectile, and you don't want to get hurt. So we're gonna just take it up a little bit, and then we put it on the tool that we compress the struts with to take that nut completely off. So we do that now. So now what we have done is we have unthreaded that nut all the way to where the last thread on the top is flush with the nut. So now we loosen this nut, and what we're going to be doing is we're going to go compress the spring so we can continue on taking this off in a controlled environment so it doesn't come out like a projectile. So now that we have our strut or shock completely loose from the spring and we have the spring compressed, what we can do is we can take out the top nut off completely, which is a 17 millimeter nut, and then we can extract our old strut or shock and put the new one in and then start putting it together. So now we have the new shock and the old shock, and we're gonna decompress the new shock, which comes compressed with this strap, and we're gonna compress them both so we can so they can both extend themselves, so you can see the difference between a new and a used KYB. So as you can see, the old one wasn't not that bad, but we have a chance to replace it at no cost. So we're gonna put a new one, so we put it back in now. And one thing is that if your strut or your new shock comes with a nut for it to put it together on the strut assembly, use the new one, because the old one might be never know what kind of condition it is, if it's gonna mess your thread. So I would recommend start with a fresh nut and a fresh thread, so everything's new. So I would put the new one that comes into the kit. So one thing that we want to make sure is that this lower piece on the spring is lined up with the groove of the strut, so that way it sits straight and right, and that way we can decompress the spring and it sits right, and then we can tighten in that nut completely. We have it all the way down to where the threads are set to where it starts getting hard to spin, so we'll just give it a couple more threads before we start decompressing, and then we can tighten it. And another thing, don't forget to put your washer that goes right here, because otherwise that nut is going to pull right through the bushing. So that's very important. So now we have the nut just barely showing one thread. So what we're going to be doing is we're going to completely tighten that nut by holding the flat piece of the rod and then tightening that nut with a 17mm wrench. Now we have that nut completely tightened, so now what we have is to put the unit back in. So that's where the strut is going to go through from the bottom up. So we have to line up the outer holes with these two studs, and then the bottom piece has to line up here so we can put the bolt through. So you got to make sure you do that. So now we line up the upper ones and then we start putting everything back on. Okay folks, this is a trick on how you can line up the upper holes with the studs and keep it going through it without having two people, because you can't reach in there to put the other two nuts in there. So what I have done is I have guided it through, and then I have set up the strut in the highest point of the suspension, and that's pushing the strut upwards. So then I can go up there, just set my two nuts in there and just present it so you have play, and then you can come down here, take it from there and slide it into the groove so you can start lining up your bolt, because otherwise you're not going to be able to keep it up there, or you're going to need a second person to put the nuts while you hold the strut. And this is the easiest way, so you can do it just by yourself. So we go and present the two nuts up there, leave them loose, and then we come down here. Now we get it into the groove, line them up, put our bolt through, and then we put the nut on this side and tighten in here, and then we can go and tighten it up there. So now we have put the bolt through, the nut on, and now it's still hanging from up there. So we're gonna tighten here and go tighten up there. Now we have replaced the 2 rear shocks. So what we do now is we put the back piece on the back piece of the seat. We bolted it down with a 2 12mm bolts, and then we put the lower seat piece, and that should complete the replacement of these 2 shocks in this tercel. So now that we have the back piece on and we're going about to put the bottom piece, you make sure that your seat belts come through, and then once you do that, and then we lock it on down here. So we put this on. And well, folks, this was an idea on a replacement of our rear shocks on a 91 to 94 Toyota Tercel. From the 95 to the 99 is similar the process, and for the Paseo. And for tools, we use a 14mm impact gun in the bottom with the open range 40mm as well. And for the upper nut on this strut, it was a 17mm wrench on our case. And then for the strut base nuts, it was a 12mm socket. And for the seat that attaches those 2 bolts on the back piece, that was a 12mm as well. So not much needed tools, and the only special tool that we used, it was a spring compressor, because that energy that is trapped inside the strut. So you want to be careful with that when you're taking that strut nut that takes all the structure apart. So just want to be careful on that one. And we just, if one advice is that if you're working on one side of the strut, you want to leave the car completely off the ground on the rear, so the suspension is relaxed, so one side is not on the ground and is fighting, is sending pressure to the strut, and you're going to have trouble taking the bottom bolt or the upper nuts off. So that way you have a relaxed system and you can work easier. That works better than having one tire on the ground and the other in the air, and then you're fighting pressure from one tire to the other side. So with that said, folks, for those folks who are watching our video and haven't subscribed to our channel, please subscribe. If you like our video, give us thumbs up, share it, and we'll see you soon with more videos here en el canal El Chano Jose.